Hello everyone, this is Thomas here with Groove 3 and welcome to our tutorial series on the new grain synthesizer inside of Reason version 10. This series will provide you with a complete overview of the grain synth and will be breaking down the various parts of the plugin as well as the different functionalities and features that the synth will have. But before we do that, I'd like to cover the basics of granular synthesis. So granular synthesis is going to be different than other methods of synthesis like subtractive synths that you may be more familiar with that are based on audio waveforms. Instead of using audio waveforms, granular synthesis uses audio samples to create the sound generating content. It then takes that audio that you plug into the synthesizer and splits it into little pieces called grains, and then whenever you play a key, it will play back those grains in the order that you've selected. So at first this can be a little bit complicated, but I figured I would show you in the audio sequencer what this is doing. So if we go ahead and pull up this audio sample that I have right here, I'm going to kind of almost split it just like a granular synth would to kind of show you what this is actually doing. So we have this sample right here called FP Roadrunner that's from the Reason Factory Sound Bank. I went ahead and just sped it up a little bit so that it matched the BPM of our song, and the sample will sound like this. So it's kind of just a nice road sound. And what the granular synth would be doing, if we go ahead and zoom in a little bit here, is it would be taking the audio sample and splitting it into little pieces. We'll just use eighth notes for demonstration. And I'll just go ahead and split that into little pieces. Actually, let's just take the first half of this. And then it'll be kind of playing back those pieces individually. So at its most basic form, a granular synth would be kind of just playing them back in order, each of these individual slices, and that would sound something like this. But things can get interesting with granular synthesis whenever you start kind of layering these grains back on top of one another. So to do that, we're actually going to use two of these audio channels, and we're just going to kind of layer them like this, kind of alternating the playback here. And let's go ahead and add in a little crossfade as well. We'll just kind of crossfade our audio signals just like this. And in a traditional granular synth, it would be doing this all automatically, but just for the purposes of demonstration, I've done it here in the sequencer, and that would kind of sound like this. Or if we didn't want to have any sort of crossfading and just wanted to kind of play back the samples all at once, it would sound like this. So what we've really done is sliced an audio sample into individual pieces and then kind of reconstructed it while layering the pieces on top of one another. At its most basic form, this is what the different granular modes inside of the synth will be doing. So if you ever kind of need a reference to think about what the granular modes are actually doing, this is always kind of a helpful way to visually demonstrate what's happening. So this synthesizer in a lot of ways is going to be very similar to the Malmstrom synth inside of Reason that you may already be familiar with if you've been using Reason for a while. At its core, this is a really simple synth as well. If you ever have any questions about the way that the signal routing is all set up inside the synthesizer, you could just flip the rack around and you'll see this nice block diagram that we have right here. So what this shows is the different signal flows inside of the synthesizer. You have the granular engine that holds our audio oscillator. You have a sub-oscillator, and then those are either fed into the filter or sent around it, which we'll cover in a future video. And then they go to the amp section where the envelopes are, through the multi-effects, and then out through these audio jacks on the back. If you ever need a reference to how this synth is set up, this chart is always a helpful resource to start with when it comes to the synth's signal flow. So now moving back to the synth, we can kind of look at the various parts of this synthesizer. We first have this audio sample. This is where you load in the different sound generating content that you want to play with in the synthesizer. You have this granular mode, which you have several different options to choose from. You have some pitch controls, a sub-oscillator, some routing functionality, a filter, an amp envelope to shape the audio envelope or the way that the audio is going to rise and fall. You have several different configurable envelopes down here that could be assigned to anything within the synthesizer, several different LFOs or low frequency oscillators that you can use for advanced modulations, a modulation bus routing menu to kind of route all the different features of the synthesizer into one another, and then finally some multi-effects as well. So now that we've kind of covered the basics of the granular synth, we're ready to dive a bit deeper into the synthesizer and start breaking down these various different parts. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.